Hello, and welcome to this video, which is the second part of two videos about development for Microsoft Dynamics 365 Business Central. The goal of these two videos is for you to learn about Visual Studio Code, or VS Code for short, and all the important elements of the AL language. In the first of these videos, we've covered the basics of VS Code, and you built your first extension for Business Central. In the second part, this part, we will go over some more advanced techniques that can be used to develop extensions in VS Code for Business Central. My name is Daniel Rummelswan, and I am a partner with Cloud Ready Software, one of the ISV development centers who can help you with just about anything related to Microsoft Dynamics 365 Business Central. We have four objectives, two of which are covered by part one of this video. In the first part, we covered our development environment, which is contained in an Azure VM that has most of the element that we need pre-installed for us. The Business Central service tier is provided in a Docker container. The nav container helper PowerShell module is pre-installed, and Visual Studio Code has the AL language extension installed in a version that will work with the Business Central version. Also in part one of this video, we've covered all of the AL object types that you need to know about, and you built your first extension for Business Central. The third objective shows a few ways to enhance your extension. We will look at the debugger, we will see how translations work, I will show you how to use dependencies between apps, and finally, we'll take a look at install and upgrade code units that can be used to handle initial app configuration and data migration for when there are any schema changes for a new version of your app. In the final section, I will cover some advanced topics such as .NET wrappers, connecting to the outside world. I will recap the technical aspects of converting your CAL objects to AL objects. And lastly, I will show you how to program the main sassification techniques. We have videos that will go into much deeper detail than we will do today, but I think it is useful for you to get a glimpse into these techniques so that you know what to look for. Let's get started. Okay, this section is called Enhancing the Extension. And within this section, we will talk about four topics. We'll start by the debugger. I'll show you how to access the debugger, how to turn on breakpoints, and I'll show you some basic functionality that you need to know about. Then we'll talk about translations, which is a new feature where the translations of your objects are kept outside of the object itself. So the translations are in a file that you can send off to a translation service without having to modify the object in development mode. I will talk about dependencies between extensions and what sort of effects that might have when you install them. And finally, we'll talk about install and upgrade code units and how you can add specific code for those events. So first, let's go into the debugger. So far, what we've done is when we start our application, we use Control F5, which starts the client without the debugger. This is a little bit quicker than using the debugger, but if you do just F5, that starts the debugging session as well. So every time that you do F5, the application will start, and in the background, the debugger will always be on as you're using the application. Within VS Code, you can set breakpoints by using F9. And to hit the breakpoints, just trigger the code. And for now, you can only set breakpoints in the extension code itself. You cannot break on some logic in the base app. You go into the code, you set a breakpoint, then you hit F5, which starts the debugger, and then you make the code hit the breakpoint, and that opens the debugger, and you can start debugging. So let's go into our demo. So we're back in our bookshelf app. And what I'm going to do is go into the customer code unit. Remember, that was the part where we congratulated ourselves on adding a new customer. So let's set a breakpoint here. You can, of course, also just hit F9. That works as well. And now instead of Control F5, you just hit F5, which recreates the package, and it starts the application for us. And in the background, you can see that the debugger buttons are already active. And as soon as we go in here and create a new customer, we should hit the breakpoint. So new customer, and then we hit OK, and then there's the breakpoint. So in here, you have step over F10, you have step into F11, and step out F11, shift F11. So let's hit F11, and that goes into the debugger. Now you can go into the debug window itself, and over here you have the same kind of variables that you would have in the debugger in NAV. My customer is mostly empty because it's a new customer. The only thing that we have is a number at this point. And in the call stack, you can see where we are from. And hitting the call stack elements will open the code highlighted to where in the call stack that is that was hit. So, for instance, this insert customer from template, that was a code unit in the or a table in the standard app. You have here the gutter indication, so you can see all the you can see all the code in the base app as well. So that's essentially the debugger. So when you click on stop, it stops the debugger. You can go back in there and it executes the code just like you would expect. The debugger stopped the current activity. So that is basically it. That's the debugger. Let's go back to the presentation. The next feature that we'll talk about is translations. Translations has gone through a bit of a change where the translations before used to be part of the object definition, and when you imported a new language layer, that actually made a change to the objects themselves. In the new system, the translations are taken out of the object definitions altogether. So let's get into the details. So as I said, the new translation process decouples translation from development. So the translation is now taken out of the object into an external file that can then be translated for multiple languages. Instead of the multi-language syntax, we have new label syntaxes instead of text constants, for instance. It has a default translation into English US and some attributes in addition to just the value itself. You generate a standard format translation file. An XLF file is built when you build the package inside of VS Code, and that generated standard format translation file is regenerated every single time that the package is built. So that file is not to be used for the actual translation, but it's more intended to be the template upon which the real translation file is built upon. Translation files can be combined with the extensions to support multi-language. So you can have an extension with multiple XLF files for multiple languages. So if you want to publish it in France, then you would have to create a translation file for French in order to be able to be accepted for that market. The caption ML still works for now. So you still have the choice between using captions or caption ML, except if you want to publish for app source, you have to use the new translation files. And so I'll show the page, the web page where you can see how that all works. It's part of the app publishing checklist. And so this is part of that. So I'll just show that real quick when we get into the demo. So in order to enable the translation, you have to set the feature for the translation file. And the screenshot at this point is in a previous version. It looks a little different, and I'll show you in the demo. And then you invoke the package command, Control-Shift-B, to generate the new package to get the XLF file. You can also hit F5. That regenerates that package as well. And then from there, that XLF file is then used inside of an external tool to translate, and I'll also show you the external tool that you can use. So the new functionality for text is no longer text constant, but it's called label. So now what you do is you define a label with a name. So text 001 is the name of the label. app published hello world is the value of that label, and then you have a number of additional optional attribute like the comment, and the max length, and the locked. Those are additional attributes for the label. You can just define the label value, and that is enough to be included in the translation file. So the same syntax applies for captions and labels. To get the translation file, like I said, you invoke the package command, which is Control-Shift-B, or you can just hit F5, and that generates that alproject3.g.xlf. So the part where it says g.xlf, that G means that it's the generated translation file. And as you can see over here, there is a source language, which is ENUS, and then in order for it to be a valid translation, you also have to have a target language in the generated file, and I'll show you what that looks like. The target language will also be set to EN-US, and then you have a source node in the XML below, and then in order for it to be interpreted as a valid translated file, you also have a target node for that same element in the different language, in the target language. And so especially for submitting apps, they are very strict about what is accepted. The compiler for the package does not always include the generated file. So especially when you want to submit your extension as an app for AppSource, you have to make sure that all the translation files are present within the app package, and I'll show you how to accomplish that goal. Let's go into the demo. So we're back in our bookshelf app, and the first thing I'm going to do is create a label for this message so that I can show you that we can create a translation file that includes that label. So that goes into the var section. We are going to create a label that's called new customer. So this will put the label into the message instead of a hard-coded message. And of course, we can do that for all the captions, but this is just to show you where that would be. Then, in order for us to enable the translation feature, the translation file feature, we have to add this as a new key value pair to the app.json. So comma, because we're going to add one, and then we're going to call the features, and this has currently one option, which is translation file. And now I save it. And so by adding this property to app.json, now the next time when I hit package, so I can do Control-Shift-P, package. And as you can see, it added a folder, and inside the folder, I now have a file called awesomebookshelf.g.xlf. And this has a couple of things that I wanted to point out to you. One is the source language. The source language is the development language in which we are doing our development. That's always EN-US. And then it also sets the target language. So this is a template for you, a placeholder for you. If you want to, for instance, create a language translation file for Canada, for instance, you are obligated to create a translation file for English for Canada and also for French for Canada. And so let me show you how that works. So in the folder, just browse to that folder. You go into my demos, bookshelves, translations. You just click on this guy. You make a copy, and then you rename it. And we call this EN-US. There's not really a mandatory naming convention, but this is kind of how they are explaining that this is probably the easiest way to do it. So if you want to also create one for Canada, you would do the same thing, en-ca, and then you would create one for fr-ca. And so now I have 3 translation files. And you would just have to go into those translation files. So this is frca, fr-ca. This is enus, that's already set. And this is enca. So now you do package again. It's not screaming at me. So everything seems to be still okay. So now the part that the translation validation looks at is that for every source node, there's also a target node. And in order for that target node to be created, you can add them manually. There's also a way to do this using some special find and replace magic. But the easiest way is to use a multi-language tool. Now let me show you the link for that. So let's go into Windows Explorer or Internet Explorer, and then I'll paste this. Show that all in here. So that's the link, as you can see it. This is the multilingual app, and when you click on English, it'll run this MSI file. I've already run this, so let me just show you the tool itself. You go into the multilingual editor, and in there, we open the XLF file. So let's browse to the C drive, my demos, bookshelf, translations, and let's pick this ENUS. So as it's opening, it is going through all the sources. So it says here over here, item 1 of 9. So it's really kind of tedious to do this. I'm sure that there is an easier way to do it, but this is how I've been able to make this work. As a developer, it was kind of tedious to do it like this. There's our label. Favorite book number. And that is it. So now, if I go back in here, you will see that for each of these sources, there's now also a target node. And so now this is a valid translation file. So since the ENUS, English US, is the same as Canadian US, what you could do is probably just make a copy of this guy and overwrite this one as CA, and then you can do your translations for French in here. Through the Azure portal, there are also translation services, and so what you do is you upload this XLF file, you specify I want to get this translated, and that comes back. And so what I wanted to also show you is the checklist for app submission. That's this guy. And in there is also a mention of the translation part. So you must include all translation of the countries your extension is supported. So this goes into the translation of the extension. So there's more information in here about the label syntax and that sort of thing. What is also very important is the countries and translation that are supported. So this is a list of the countries and what language code you have to take care of. So if you want to publish your app in the US, you have to provide a translation for this language code. If you want to publish in Canada, you have to provide these two translation code. If you want to go to Switzerland, you have to provide these three translation files. So every country that you check when you submit your app for AppSource, it'll make a note of that, and the validation guys will make sure that there is a translation file for all of those languages. So that's it about translation files. Let's go back to the presentation. Our next topic is app dependencies. Apps are not always installed in isolation. Sometimes apps are communicating with each other, or you would have an extension that depends on another extension. What that means is you could create an app that builds on top of another app. So let's say a big ISV partner comes out with a great product and you have a fantastic idea of adding some functionality to that product that is not contained within the app itself. And so in that case, you would get access to the app package of the ISV partner, and you can build something on top of that. And so those dependencies help structure more complex deployment scenarios. So at the same time, you could have an idea for a very complex set of functionalities that maybe is not very good for putting into one single app. And so in that case, you might structure it where you would have a base app with a number of additional apps built on top of that. And so you can accomplish that by creating a dependency between apps. And so it kind of boosts the code and business logic reusability because you can contain certain pieces of business logic within certain apps without providing access to the code from other apps. And so it really helps structure those capabilities. How do you declare a dependency? Well, a dependency is declared in the manifest file. So app.json has a section for dependencies, and those dependency declarations must include a GUID, an app ID, the name of the app, the publisher, and also the version. Because those versions are important, you can build an extension on top of another extension in a certain version. So it's important that is also included in the dependency declaration. So I can talk about this for a long time, but let's just go into the Azure VM and I can show you how it all works. So inside of my Azure VM, I have three Visual Studio Code windows open. One is with extension A, one is with extension B, and one is with extension C. Now let me show you real quick what is in those extensions. So in my first extension, I have a code unit 50,120, and that shows a very simple message starting extension A, and this is a subscriber to code unit 1's on after company open event. And at the same time, I have created a new event as part of extension A, which is a business event called onStart extension A. Then in extension B, I have another simple code unit, 50,130. And in that code unit, I am subscribing to that onStart extension A event in code unit 50,120. And again, I'm showing a simple message starting extension B. And I also publish an event on start extension B. So you guessed it, in extension C, my code unit says starting extension C, and I am subscribing to the onStart extension B. So you can already see the dependency, but of course I have to specify and declare this in app.json. So in my app.json, I have under the dependencies area, I have a dependency on extension B. And so this GUID is the GUID, the app ID of extension B. So if I go up here, it ends with 6641F. 6641F is the app ID for extension B. And at the same time, I have a dependency on extension A in extension B. So let's go to extension C and try to publish this. So I do Control F5, and I am getting a message that says a package with publisher cloud ready software, name extension B, and a version compatible with 1.0.0.0 could not be loaded. And so this fails, right? And so we are expecting this because we have not published extension B yet. If I go into extension B and I do Control F5 in here, I should get the same error message pretty quickly. And now it says a package with publisher cloud ready software name extension A and a version compatible with 1.0.0.0 could not be loaded. Code unit 50,120 is missing, and the item classification table is missing because that's also part of that extension. Now, if I go into extension A, which is the first one that's not dependent on anything, I do Control F5, it builds the package, and now it should start publishing that. So now I log in, and on company open should fire, and I should see a message starting extension A. So far, so good. So now let me log out because, in order for us to see on company open, we have to log in. So now when I do Control F5 in extension B, this should now succeed. I am logging in. Now I see the message starting extension A and also the message starting extension B. So let me log out again. And now we go to extension C. So I do Control F5. I log back in. And now I should see starting extension A, starting extension B, and starting extension C. So let's go and take a look at extension management and see what that looks like. So we have extension A installed, and I don't see the dependencies here, or here, or here. But I know that extension A is independent, extension B depends on A, extension C depends on B. Now, if I want to uninstall A, it'll ask me, the extension A has a dependency on one or more extensions. So extension C and extension B are mentioned in here. So it knows the chain of dependency. Now, from the extension management screen in Dynamics 365 Business Central, you can actually click yes here, and it will uninstall all the dependency with it. And so this is quite powerful. You can imagine that you could have an extension that builds on top of another product. Maybe there's a capability that you want to add to an existing product. Maybe you have a capability that you want to add to a number of different products. Maybe you have like some sort of service that you wish to provide, a payment service, for instance, that you want to provide to a number of bigger products. And so you can actually work with those ISV partners in certifying your product for their product. And so it provides all sorts of opportunities that you can take advantage of. So let's go back to the presentation. The last topic in our Enhanced Techniques section is about install and upgrade code units. Microsoft has exposed a number of events that are triggered during the installation process and also during the upgrade process. You can subscribe to those events by creating special types of code units in which those events are available as triggers. In this section, I will show you the technical details of those special types of code units and how you can utilize them. The process of installing an extension has 3 steps. The first step is the publish, the second step is the sync, and the third step is the install. And when you talk about upgrading an extension, the third step is obviously an upgrade process. The publish step makes the app available on the server. So in this step, you upload the app file into the service tier, and it is exposed in extension management. The next step is the sync step, which applies the schema changes on a database level. At this point, the app is still not available to be used by the end user. That happens during the install process. The install step packages the data, the web services, permission sets, all those things, report layouts, and it wires up the metadata, so it puts the data into companion tables, and it runs the install code in the installation code unit that I will show you in a minute. And so at the bottom, you'll see the PowerShell scripts to install an app. So it starts with publish-nav app, then it's sync-nav app, then it's install-nav app. So in order for you to have an app available to be used for the user, you have to run through these 3 steps. And the install code, which happens, which is run during the install process, looks a little bit like this. So it is a code unit. It has a subtype equals install, and there's a number of triggers available to be run. So one is on install app per company, and one is on install app per database. So if you have tables that are not company specific, you would create some data in the on install app per database. If it's company specific, which is the case usually, you would put that code into the on install app per company trigger. That's the trigger you'll use mostly. So let's go into our Azure VM and let's take a look at one of those install code units. So in our bookshelf workspace, let's create a new object and we'll call it install code.al. And this is a code unit, so we're not going to use a snippet. Code unit. Let's use number. What's the number available? 50,101. Install code. Curly brace, done. Then to mark this code unit as an install code unit, you have to define a subtype. And the available subtypes are install, normal, test, test runner, and upgrade. We want to create an install code unit, so we're going to select install. Then, in order for us to subscribe to those events that I talked about before, we essentially just create a trigger. And in there, because we are in an install type code unit, the system knows to provide either one of these 2 triggers. So you have an on install app per database, and then you have an on install app per company. Since I'm going to do something that's company specific, that's the one I'm going to pick. Of course, this needs a begin and an end, and we're ready to write some code. So we are working on a bookshelf app. So let's say that part of your installation code is by creating a couple of books. So let's start by creating a little procedure, a local procedure called insert book. And we're going to create a few variables. Book number, book title, which is a text, book author, which is also text, and let's give it book page count, which is an integer. The variable is book, and this is a record of type book. With book do begin. If get book number, then exit. And let me paste the rest of the code. Okay, so we have a function that inserts a book. And now in the on install app per company, we can actually call this insert book. Let's do 0001 and Rock Your Guitar by Leo Blender with a page count of 450. Let's insert another 2 base in 5 minutes a day by Betty Treble, and that's a mere 227 pages. Let's save that. And so now what I'm going to do is hit Control F5, which should install my app, and it should trigger this install code, and it should create those 2 books. And there you have it. It creates those 2 books in the installation code, which is the goal of our exercise. Of course, in a real life exercise, in a real life situation, you would not necessarily always insert some demo data. That would probably not be a good idea, but these are the events that you can subscribe to and take care of some installation code yourself. So let's go back to the presentation. The next step is upgrade an extension. And like I said before, the same steps are available. There's a publish step, there's a sync step, and instead of an install step, there's an upgrade step. Again, the publish step makes the app available on the server, so a newer version than the installed app. And then the sync step applies the schema changes on the database level. But now, since there's data, there are possibly schema changes. And so in order for that to be handled, there's a third step, that's the upgrade step, with a commandlet start -navapp a data upgrade, and that performs the upgrade code unit. And at the bottom, you'll see the 3 PowerShell commandlets that come with those 3 steps. In the upgrade code units, there are a few code hooks. The first is onCheck preconditions. It verifies the state to determine if an upgrade should execute, so if it's possible to run it. An error is thrown here will prevent the entire upgrade from running. So if you cause an error here, it rolls the whole thing back. And then we have onUpgrade, which performs the bulk of the upgrade work, modifying data for the new version. This is where you would handle some data migration in case you add some fields to a table, you want to put some default values in there. Maybe you split a table up, or maybe you combine some tables. This is where you would perform that code. And then after that, you have an onValidate code hook, which validates the state necessary to assert that it was successful. So maybe you have a little test that you want to perform in there. An error is thrown here will also roll back the upgrade transaction itself. So the code flow of the upgrade process is first it goes into the transactional phase, where it first does a check for the preconditions, and then it runs the upgrade step, and then it does the validate of the upgrade. And after that is done, it does a post-commit phase, where you can do some additional checking after the commit. So that's a separate transaction in itself. The upgrade code itself is also done in a code unit, where you set the subtype to upgrade instead of install. And then when you create a trigger, these triggers in your screen are available to be programmed against. So you have an onCheck precondition per company and per database. You have an onUpgrade per company and per database. And then you also have an onValidate per company and per database. So let's go into the Azure VM and let's take a look at what that looks like. We're back in our bookshelf workspace, and let's create a new code unit, and we'll call it upgrade code.al. And we'll create a code unit in here. Let's see what the number can be. 50102. We'll call it upgrade code, curly brace, done. And the first thing we need to do is set the subtype as an upgrade code unit. And then in here, we will have the following triggers available. So as you can see, we have 2 preconditions, one for company, one for database, also an upgrade and a validate upgrade per company and per database. And what we are going to do is we are going to add some code to the on upgrade per company trigger. Begin and end. First, we'll add some variables. One is, let's call it book, which is a record, and the book table. Then we are going to customer, that's a rec customer. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to look up the first book in the book list, which, we should find the guitar book, and then set the my favorite book field of every customer to that value. So every customer gets a favorite book. And so the thought behind it is I'm going to add the favorite book, and every customer should have a favorite book, and I will pick every customer's favorite book for them, essentially. So first, book dot reset. If not, book dot find first, then exit. So if we don't have any books, we're not going to execute any code. Customer dot reset. If not, customer dot is empty, then customer dot modify all, and we're going to favorite book number, and we're going to set it to this field number. Okay, so if we find a book, then we're going to the customer table, and we are going to set the favorite book number for every customer to that number. One more thing we need to do is we need to set the version to a higher number, and we save that. And then what we need to do is we need to create a package. So over here, you see that it now created a second package. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a second, or I've already prepared this temp dev, this web client, the temp dev web client, and we're going to install the package in there first. I'll show you that it creates those two books, and then we're going to run through the upgrade script, and I'm going to show you that it correctly implements that logic that we've written. So let's take a look. I've already prepared the PowerShell script because this is not supposed to be about writing PowerShell scripts, but this is, and let me just open the nav container helper screen at the top here. As you can see, this is a nav container helper. And so inside there, we have a few app handling functions. And so we're going to use those functions to publish and install and upgrade our app. So I have version 1, the app file for version 1. This has nothing installed. This is a fresh US database, and we're going to publish the nav container app in here. So let's run that script. And down below here, you'll see it's going to publish the awesome bookshelf version 1. And up here, one of the switches is the sync, and one of the switches is in the install. So part of the nav container app commandlet, you can say, I want to sync and install this app immediately. Otherwise, you also have a different command for sync, and there's also a different command for install. You could also enter into the container and then run the regular PowerShell commandlets. But as you can see, this works just fine. So it says app successfully published. Let's go take a look in the web client. Now I want to see our book list, page 50101. And now, as you can see, Rock Your Guitar and Bass in 5 Minutes a Day by Leo Blender and Betty Treble has been implemented. And just to be complete, let me show you that A Datum Corporation, one of our customers. We do have a favorite book number, but it does not have a value yet. So let's close out this guy, go to the upgrade script, and in here I'm using a couple of variables. So I set my container name to tempdev, that's this guy over here, this guy. And then we are going to run through the unpublish, and part of unpublishing is also uninstall it, so that's a switch. You can actually run the uninstall command first and then the unpublish command, but Microsoft has been so friendly to add that as a switch to the unpublish commandlet. Then we are going to publish the version 2 of our app, so version 2.0.0.0.app, and I'm telling it to sync because I want the schema changes to be implemented, but let's not install it first because we have to start the upgrade. And so by this command, let's start nav container app data upgrade. You set it with that app name. It doesn't need the version because the version's already included in the container, and by the app name, it knows that the upgrade is about to start. So let's run this guy. And as you can see down below, uninstalling, unpublishing, app successfully unpublished. Now it's publishing, and now it's upgrading, and now it says app successfully upgraded. So let's open the web client again. Let's go into the customers. And let's take a look at A Datum Corporation. And now you'll see that it found the first book in the list, and it set that customer's favorite book. It goes to Trade Research, the same thing. It goes to the School of Fine Art, same thing. So that proves our installation code runs when it's installed, and our upgrade code runs when it's upgraded. So this is essentially how you do it. You can get quite fancy with it. There's even an app info API, so you can even code against the API and against the app information, and there's a bunch of different information available in there. There will be a video about the life cycle, and we will go into much more detail on installing and upgrading code units. So I just thought for this video, we'll just cover the basics. And so let's go back to the presentation. Our next section is about advanced topics. So these are topics that are beyond, your basic capabilities. And for today, I'm going to talk about 4 topics. One is .NET wrappers. Some of these different data types have been introduced to replace .NET interop for some very common scenarios like text builders and HTTP clients type stuff. Connecting to the outside world uses some of those .NET wrappers. I'll revisit the converting CAL to AL, the technical steps to do that. I think that's an important topic to repeat, although I'm not going to go into too much detail in there, and I'll cover that when we get to it. And then I'll talk a little bit about the sassification techniques. And so the sassification techniques are also important techniques that are covered in great detail in a different video. So I'll just race through those 2 last topics just to cover them and to show you what's all involved. And I will refer to the videos once we get to those sections. So .NET wrappers. In Seaside, we were used to using .NET Interop, and anything that's available in any .NET namespace was basically up for grabs. In Visual Studio Code, they've decided not to expose these .NET Interop capabilities because it's all on Azure, and they don't like it when that's in there. And so instead of providing .NET Interop directly, we've been given a few new data types that we can use in AL code directly, and they are all based on these .NET namespaces. So if you're familiar with those, you will definitely be familiar with the way to program these things. and I'm going to give you an example of all the ones that are listed here. So we're going to get started with the text and the text builder data type. The text builder is based on the .NET string builder. So all the functions in there you will recognize. It includes its functions like append line and replace. The text is also based on the .NET string. New for text functions like contains and starts with and ends with and replace. If you want to see a full list of those elements and those members, go to the link at the bottom of your screen. And in the screenshot, you can see an example, and that's what we'll program in just a minute. The next two data types are the list and the dictionary data type. These are strongly typed lists and dictionaries. They are based on the .NET generic list and dictionary types. They are only possible with simple types for now, and so the syntax is list of, and then between brackets integer, and dictionary of text between brackets. And so the list examples is in your screen. This is the one that we'll build. We'll do some more stuff with that as well. And also an example of dictionary. And I'll get on with those as well. So let's go into our Azure VM and let's get started. So back in our bookshelf workspace, let's create a new object and call it .NET wrapper.al. It's a code unit. Let's see what's the number. 50103, and we'll call it .NET wrappers. Curly brace done. Trigger on run, begin. We're going to add this in just a minute. So we're going to create a new procedure. It's not going to be a local procedure. We're going to call it text to demo. First, I'm going to create a text. And then I'm going to create a text builder. Text builder. I don't like those spaces in there. Okay. So let's first start with the text builder. We can do append line. You can append lines. You can also append or just append, add characters. My text builder dot to the current line. My append line, some text. My text dir dot replace is another thing that we can do. And in there we say some text. We're going to replace that with replaced by some other text. Oh, forgot that. And then we're going to set my text to my text builder to text. My text to upper. So my text also has the text data type itself also has methods. And then we will put my text into a message, right? And then in on run, let's do a text demo, save this. And what we'll do is go into the book list. Of course, we've already prepared this toggle line comments, and then app.json, set this back to 0 to 1 because we have not upgraded this guy. Yeah, Control F5. Let's get that going. Let's see what happens there. So let's take a look at the code. Keep the code in the screen here. And let's see, run.net wrapper. Let's see what happens. So as you can see, we can append line or just add characters to the current line. That was the append, and that didn't break the line. This did break the line, and then we added one that's called some text. And then in the next line, we said some text. We've replaced that by some other text. Then it set it to my text, and that my text up to upper. So you see that everything in here is uppercase now. So that's kind of how that works. All right, some basic examples with using text builder and text. Let's close this guy. We don't need that one anymore. Right, so that is a demo of text. Let's see if we can put together a demo for list procedure, and we'll call it list demo. Begin var customer names. We're going to create a list of text. Right, so we have a list of text is what we're going to create. First, we're going to add some names, customer names dot add, and then we'll say, let's add Bill. Let's add John. Add Lily Bell. It's my niece's daughter. Has lots of L's in it. So a list is a indexed list of things. And in our case, we make a list of texts. So we now have 3 names in the list. And let's see if we can do some things with it. So if customer names dot contains, right, you can ask it, does it have the name John in it? Then message John is in the, not in, on the list. We can also see what is on a particular index. So name at index 1 plus customer names dot get 1. So let's create another procedure to print the customer names. And we will pass the customer names list of text. Or and we'll put the customer names out of the list into the customer name. And we are going to begin. for each name in customer names do begin message customer name and let's see what this does. Wait, we need to put this in. Okay, Control F5. Let's see what that does. Actions, run.NET wrapper. That's the same message we've seen before. And now we went into, that's this guy. If that customer names dictionary or that customer's names list has John, the name at index 1 is Bill, right? That was the first name that we've put in there. And then, hey, wait a minute. Oh, you know what? I forgot to call that. So print customer names. Right? So we send the customer names into the function. Let's see how that works now. Actions, run.NET wrapper, and that's that first message. And then we went into the list, right? So we added Bill and John and Lily Bell to the list. And then it says if that list contains John, then message John is on the list. The message name at index 1, it gets the first name. And then we go in there, and then for each customer name in customer names, now we do Bill and John and Lily Bell. So now let's go and take a look at dictionary. For dictionary, we're going to create another procedure. Procedure, count characters in customer name. And we are going to pass name, which is a text. Begin. In the variables, we will create a letter counter, and that is a dictionary of character and integer. And then we will have two integers, I and C, which is the count. Integer. Let's clear the letter counter first, and then we go for I equals 1 to string length, customer name, I always get mixed up with those parentheses. Sometimes they add them, sometimes they don't. Do begin. Let's put the end in there so I don't forget. If letter counter dot get customer name, that's the character, right? So we are going to the character at that index, and then we'll use C for the integer, then letter counter dot set customer name at I C plus 1. Else letter counter dot set customer name at I set that to 1. And I think I have 8 parentheses too many. Okay. So what we're doing here is we're going through all the characters of the name, and we set it to a character and then an integer. So if it finds it, it increases the count by 1. If it doesn't find it, it sets it, it creates that entry, and it sets it to 1. Right? And so we're going to show you if letter counter dot get. Well, let's look for the letter L, and then we'll get C added. Oh, and we'll get C added there as well. Then message the name %1 has the letter L %2 times, and then we'll put customer name, and we do format C. I think that should do it. Okay. First we'll get the big message. Then we say John is on the list, name at index 1. Then we go into bill. John, Lily Bell. Oh, wait, I know what I did wrong. We have to call it. Customer name. Now let's see what happens. Actions, .NET wrapper, big message, John is on the list, Bill, and then it says, okay, that's Bill, and now I should get a message. The name Bill has the letter L 2 times, John has nothing, and Lily Bell has more than 2, 4 times. So those are examples of those text.NET wrappers. And let's go back to our presentation. That was the dictionary example. So connecting to the outside world is a little bit more complex, and I'm just going to show you the code that's in there. I'm not going to build it from scratch. That would take a really long time. Maybe we'll have some other videos that goes into this a little bit deeper. Right now, that's not on the schedule, so let's just go into these real quick. The HTTP API fills the gap for accessing HTTP-based web services without .NET interop. The .NET interop is replaced by all these .NET wrappers. The HTTP API allows you to declare web requests specific variables in AL. The objects are automatically instantiated and initialized, so there's no need to program any constructors, which is really nice. So that's a really AL-friendly way to program. And so the HTTP API types are HTTP client, HTTP content, headers, request message, and response message. These types are direct replacement for those .NET types of the same name from the HTTP namespace. And so you can read MSDN about system.net.http, and all the information in there should be relevant for the AL types that you can use in VS Code. So let's go into the demo. I have a workspace for an HTTP demonstration. And in there, we have a page extension for the currency list, which adds an action get exchange rate to the currencies list. And in launch.json, I specify I want to use page 5, which is the currencies list. And then in that action, I have a procedure. The procedure is get exchange rate. Let's expand this a little bit. The variables that we're using are HTTP client of type HTTP client. You'll notice that you can use the type as the name of the variable as well, which personally I don't really like to do, but this seems to be standard in .NET programming. So go ahead and do that. It's allowed in AL. The next variable is the HTTP response. So we do something with the HTTP client and we catch the response in the HTTP response message, and then we read what's in the response and put that into a response text, and that's going to go into a message. So our HTTP client uses the get method to actually make the call. The call is this URL is a text variable. This is the link, and then the placeholders for %1 and %2 are the currency code from general ledger setup and the currency dot code, which is drawn from the list of currencies where the cursor is at. So the list that is selected, that's the code that it uses. It gets the currency out of general ledger setup, and then it gets the exchange rate between those two, and it reads it into the response text, which is a regular text variable, and the HTTP response. You can see this HTTP response has all these members that you can use. So content dot, right? And so you can do anything that's part of that namespace in .NET, you should be able to also use in AL. So let me just run this guy. And so I'm at the Canadian dollar. That's the line that I've selected. I hit the get exchange rate button, and that gets the rate between the USD and the Canadian is 1.2909 based on March 29. It's like right. So I can go into the euro, action, get exchange rate between USD and euro is 0.81. So if you're receiving euros, that's a really good rate. If you're buying euros, not so much. Let's go back to the presentation. The next .NET wrapper is the JSON API, and this fills the gap for building, navigating, searching, or manipulating JSON without .NET interop. It allows you to declare JSON variables directly in AL and constructing JSON from string or converting JSON to string. It can be used together with HTTP API to consume REST web services, and it can also be used as return value from function. The JSON API types are these four: the object, array, token, and value. And these are direct replacements for the .NET types of the similar name that you can read about in the newtonsoft.com link at the bottom of your screen. So constructing JSON, object.add, text, and then hello, add number, and then the number. So JSON is key value pairs. Then you add the objects to a JSON array, then you write it to a string, and then you look at the message, and that prints the entire string. So this is the entire JSON object that you see up here, and that's in the string. So let's get into the demo in which I can show you how to consume a JSON-based REST web service. This is also a demo that I have, a workspace that I'll open in Visual Studio Code. We have a table that we're going to use as a temporary table. This is just the structure of an AL issue. And what we're going to do is we're going to read the issues from the AL GitHub repository, and we're going to show that on the page. And that has an action on that page to load them. And where it loads is in this code unit. So let me just run through this code unit. I have a record AL issue based on that table. I have an HTTP client and a response message to read from that web service. And then I'm going to use these JSON variables to actually put the values from the website into the JSON array. And then I'm going to read it out of the JSON array and create records into the AL issue table and show them on page. So starts by clearing out that AL issue table. Then it goes into the HTTP client and it adds, it goes into the api.github.com repos Microsoft AL issues. So that's just the standard URL for those issues, which are caught into the response message. And if that has a success status code, it goes on. If it can read, it goes on. And then for each JSON token in the JSON array, right? So the JSON text is over here. So response message dot content read as JSON text, right? So that JSON text is of type text. And then the JSON array is read from the JSON text. So JSON text is a regular text variable that is now read into a JSON array that interprets it, and each token in that array is then read into a JSON object, and that JSON object then can be disseminated into individual values where you say, okay, get me the JSON object for number, get me the JSON object for title, et cetera, and that gets set into the AL issue fields, and that gets then inserted into the table. So let me just scroll down so that you can also see the code for the get JSON token and select JSON token. Those are called in this row of commands. And let's see what happens when I run this. So as you can see, this is the list of issues from GitHub from the AL repository. And if I can read some of these, you can see, let's see, like for instance, we just worked on install app per company, for instance. Let's see what the issue is there. I like this demo. So this is the AL repository on GitHub. It's not relevant what that issue is. It's just that there are these values out of that issues list that we read by using JSON objects. So let's go back to the presentation. The next one is the XML API, and again, that also fills the gap for handling and manipulating something without .NET interop. It allows you to declare XML variables directly in AL, can be used together with HTTP API, etc. Types can be used as return values from function as well. And here are the variable types that you can use within that space. XML attribute, XML node, XML element, XML document, and a bunch more. And so those types are direct replacement for .NET types of the same name from the system.xml namespace. And the link at the bottom of your screen brings you to MSDN library about that namespace. Here's an example. So that's it about .NET wrappers. They are very useful. These are the result of Microsoft asking the community for more examples of common .NET usages. I just want to mention here that if you have a .NET usage that you were using before in Seaside that you would like to see as a variable type in VS Code, then go to that GitHub repository and create a new issue and call it request for new .NET wrapper and make your case. explain why you need that .NET wrapper, why you need to have that capability in the AL language, and if Microsoft agrees, they will create it for you. So that was it about .NET wrappers. Let's go to the next topic. The next topic is converting CAL to AL. This topic has been covered in another video called Migrate Your IP from CAL to AL, but I thought it was worth repeating in this video because it's quite a common scenario. And so I am just going to race through this topic, or at least I won't go into the super detail. And if you want to learn more about it, if this is not enough, if you want more details, go to the other video, and that's where I explain all the details for it. Basic steps of converting CAL to AL is you have the deltas of your app in a previous version of NAV. So our starting point is you already have done this. So you have already moved all your code into a event-based architecture, and it is already possible to create these deltas of your app. And so this is the part that if you are in a real life situation with these deltas, that the conversion may depend on certain things being allowable or not allowable in those deltas, whether it succeeds or not. But I'm assuming you have the final version of your deltas in your app in a previous version of NAV. So not NAV 2018, but 2017 or earlier. The first thing we'll do is apply those deltas to NAV 2018 or Dynamics 365 Business Central. We export those objects in new syntax, and new syntax is necessary for interpreting that into AL file. We create new syntax deltas. Those deltas are then converted to AL files. So the process is on the left-hand side, you have your solution in a database in, for instance, NAV 2017, but it can also be 15 or 13. And we need two things. So one is the original version of that database, and then your solution in that database. So we need to have the base version of the database in order for us to be able to calculate the deltas. And on the right-hand side in NAV 2018 or Dynamics 365 Business Central, we have your solution in AL in VS Code. So in order to get to the AL files, we have to convert the delta files in the new syntax to AL files. And in order for that to happen, we need to have those deltas. And so to get the deltas in the new syntax, we first have to calculate the deltas in the old syntax. So that's why we need the original version in your solution. Then we have the deltas. On the right-hand side, we have the original text file in new syntax. So that's the non-modified objects. Then we apply the deltas of your old solution into the new version. And then from there, we export the modified and new syntax. So now we have on the left-hand side, we have original text files and also modified text files. Based on those two, and those are in new syntax, we calculate the deltas, and those files are then converted to AL. And all that on the right-hand side should be done on an isolated temporary environment. And so that's important. And the fact that we are working with Docker enables this because it's very easy to set up. And everything that I just showed you is packed into very powerful, three very easy PowerShell scripts. PowerShell made easy with the nav container helper. If you don't have nav container helper, you can also script this with PowerShell. It just takes a few extra commands, and those are available. Just get in touch with us and we can help you get those scripts. But using the nav container helper, step one is to create an isolated environment. It's just a single command. Step two is apply the old syntax delta and compile. I believe that's 2 or 3 commandlets. And then step 3 is simply converting those modified objects to AL files, and then you're done. And so the result of that script is a folder with AL files. It's not necessarily a workspace yet, but it's close. Let's go into our demo in our Azure VM. Let's open the PowerShell ISE. And in PowerShell ISE, I am going to load these scripts. Now let me just real quick open Windows Explorer and I'll show you where everything is. So on the local C drive, you have a folder called Program Data. And for this, you'll have to make the hidden items visible because the program data is a hidden folder. Inside there is a folder called nav container helper, and the nav container helper folder is the folder that the container uses to communicate with the host. And so what you want to do is you want to have all of the files that you're using in this effort in this nav container helper folder. And so there's a folder called extensions, and in the extensions folder, you'll see there's a folder for nav server. That's the default container that's contained within this Azure VM. And then temp dev, as you've seen in a previous demo, I've created this temp dev. I'm going to recreate it. I'm going to show you how easy it is to do that. Part of creating this temp dev, when you do this for the first time, is it creates these two folders. And those folders are a full export of all the objects in old syntax and also a full export of all the objects in new syntax. And let me show you real quick what the difference is. So on the left-hand side here, I have page 30, the item card, and I'm going to also open the item card in new syntax. So if I move this guy over to the left, I can show you the difference. So I have page 30, the item card on the left-hand side is old syntax. So as you can see, the date is 02/2018. That's region specific. So that's the US formatting of the date. Then we have 10:49 a.m. That's also US formatting. On the right-hand side is new syntax. And in there you can see 2018 02/20D. That is a region neutral format of the date. Much better because now you can use it anywhere in the world. We have a time format that's different. One other difference between old syntax and new syntax is that in the page object itself, you have the source table is table 27. We all know as nav developers that table 27 is in fact the item table, but on the right-hand side, that's actually named by name rather than the object number. And so for AL files, object numbers do still work, but the preference is to use object names instead of object numbers. And so that's really the difference between old syntax and new syntax. And that's also the reason why we have to apply old version deltas to an F 2018 database, because older versions that are older than 2018 are not capable of exporting those in new syntax. And so that's the reason why we have to apply it to new version of an NAV database so that we can create those new syntax deltas. Okay? So this is step 3, step 2, step 1. In step 1, we create an isolated environment in which we will convert the code. And so I'm going to recreate this because I imported and ran those upgrade code units in my temp dev, and so I have to recreate it just to make sure I have a vanilla version. So just hit the play button. The container name is temp dev. This is the image name that I've used for that. I need to make sure this is the right license. Also in the nav container helper folder, as you can see. Now I hit the play button, and this will start executing the script. And so I'm going to pause the video recording and let this run. It's going to run for about 2-3 minutes. So it's finished now. It took about 300 seconds, so about 5 minutes. I think my virtual machine is slowing down a little bit. Just to go through it, so it says new nav container. It recreated this temp dev, so if it already exists, it removes it first and then it rebuilds it. So if you have a container with a certain name, the only thing you have to do to recreate it is to just say create the new container and it recreates it from there. There's a switch here, do not export objects to text. Um, that determines whether it's going to get the objects into these two folders. And so the version is 20723. That was the version of the image in this guy. So the image Microsoft, I don't know why it's coming down like that. Microsoft Dynamics nav preview, dev preview, FinUS, that's the version of TempDev. My nav server is a different version, but TempDev uses that particular image. And so because it already has those two folders, it didn't recreate it. You can also just, uncomment that, and then it'll skip that part. So that's step one. Let's go into step two, where it's going to go into my migration folder. And so I have a folder called Delta and a folder called scripts. The scripts are these three scripts that's in those folders. In the extensions folder, we also have a temp dev folders. And at this point, we have a my folder and a program files folder. And when we run this script, it is going to create some folders inside of the temp dev folder that at the end of this exercise, we're going to destroy the temp dev container because we will no longer need it. And that will also get rid of all the folders that are created inside of this extensions folder. So let's hit it. And I'm going to pause the video recording until this is finished as well. This took maybe 2 minutes to run. And so what it's doing here, it is going to copy original objects from the original folder here in old syntax into this folder called original. So original now has these three objects. And if we take a look at the Delta files of our original folder, so we have these are the regular objects themselves, and these Delta files are the Delta files of the objects that we've modified for our app. And so we've changed page 30 and 31. Those are the item list and the item card. And then we've changed the item table. And so we need the original objects, those 2 pages in that table. It took the original Delta files and applied them to the original objects. And the original objects are in our TempDev database. And it created a new file called merged objects that includes all the objects that are part of our IP. And those objects are then imported into the temp dev container, and then it compiled those objects. And so at this point, we have the temp dev database, and we can go into temp dev, nav user, 1, 2, 3, and I can go into the modified field. And if I look at all, you see that I have all the objects that are part of my IP. Those are the same objects as the one in my Delta file, are now imported and compiled in my NAV database in TempDev. Okay, so the next step, step number 3, is to convert those modified objects to AL objects. And so inside of this commandlet, and you can actually go on to the nav container helper repository on GitHub to see all the PowerShell that's inside of this command. It used to take like 6 or 7 steps with standard NAV PowerShell commandlets to do this. So let me just play because this is going to take just a little bit of time. And so Microsoft has created this very handy little PowerShell commandlets, and this is how quick that is. So once those objects are in there, it's just a matter of exporting them and converting them to AL objects. And so if I drag this AL new syntax onto Visual Studio Code, you will see immediately that these are well-formed objects. You'll have some issues. I don't have a manifest file. There's no launch.json. There's all sorts of missing references. That means it doesn't have symbols yet. And so one way to create workspace for this is to actually do Control-Shift-P and then do al.go, create a new workspace, and then just move these files into your new workspace. So what you need to be careful of is that, so this is your AL files, but it is also inside of this tempdev folder. And so if you remove the tempdev container, you're going to lose your objects. So what you want to do is at least copy those objects to a safe folder so that you've done with that. And then you can go in here and you can simply say remove nav container temp dev, and that gets rid of your container, and that is really quick. So you'll see those shortcuts are gone. In my extensions folder, the reason why this was not removed is because I was still looking at it in Visual Studio Code. But normally, if you don't have this open, it will delete that particular folder as well. So, this is the result of removing that nav container temp dev. And so now what I have is my AL new syntax. I can create a new workspace. I can start doing development on my objects. Our last of the advanced techniques are sassification techniques. I am not going to go into very deep detail in these either, because we have another video about sassification techniques. And in that video, I will go through each and every one of these objects in detail. So I'll just run through these slides and I'll show you the objects real quick. But if you want to learn how to do this and run through a lab, I'll take you by the hand and do it step by step in the sassification video itself. So what is a sassified user experience? I've talked about this a little bit in the Migrate Your IP video about what this really means. But in a nutshell, it is about quick adoption. It's about leading users to features. It's a step-by-step guidance through setups. It will provide you with contextual information, hide irrelevant fields, and essentially simplify the user experience. And so the big difference between implementing on-site in an NAV on-premise world is that in a sassified experience like Dynamics 365 Business Central, the user doesn't have a team of consultants implementing their solution on site. So you have to provide a way for the user to learn how to use the product. And so in order for that, we've summarized the sassification techniques into 4 categories. One is assisted setups. This is essentially a list of setups and information about status. We have wizards that are behind those assisted setup. So when you click to execute on an assisted setup, you will open a wizard and the wizard will take you through that process step by step. Notifications is a contextual way to provide information at the right moment without intrusion into the user's experience. So instead of getting a message at the moment of posting, you will get a message, notification in your screen when that is relevant, in such a way that you can still interact with the system without first having to deal with a notification. So the notification can remain in your screen as you're doing something else. before you address the notification itself. And then the final Sassified technique is the application areas, which are intended to simplify the user experience. So the most obvious one is the difference between essential and premium, where the essential experience is everything except for service management and manufacturing. And when you turn that over to premium, those features will become visible. So depending on the experience, certain things are visible or not. And then application areas further specifies what is visible in your screen. So I'm not going to go into application areas very much. That'll also be part of Sassified techniques, the separate video. What we are going to talk about are wizards, assisted setups, and notifications. First, what is a wizard? A wizard is a series of user input screens or steps. And so you see a screen. In that screen is a very limited number of instructions. You follow those, you hit the next button, and it goes to the next screen. It hides irrelevant options. A different way of saying this is it only shows the relevant options. And then you can navigate with a next and previous button. So you're supposed to be able to walk back and forth through the screens of a wizard. The web client shows the buttons with specific styling, and that's all part of the definition of those wizards. It's based on the page of type navigate page, and it is a crucial part of the assisted setup. So in the next few slides, I'm going to show you all the steps that are part of creating the object itself. So first, you create a page, and the page has a page type of navigate page. It is a new AL file in VS Code, and so you use the tpage snippet, set the ID and the page name, you set the page type property to navigate pane, and in this example, we're going to create a wizard that's based on the company information table. Step 2 is add steps, and the way to do that is by creating a group inside of the layout. So you have the layout section. In there, you have the content area, and in there, you create groups. So let's say for our wizard, we want to create a wizard with 3 steps. You create a group step 1, a group step 2, a group step 3. Then you create a global integer type variable called current step. And then in each group, you set the visible property with an expression. So visible equals current step equals 1. So if the current step is 1, then step 1 is visible. If the current step is 2, step 1 is not visible. And so in step 2 group, you say visible equals current step equals 2, etc. The third step is to add content. So you create a subgroup inside the steps and set the caption. So inside you have a group called company name inside of step 1, visible equals current step equals 1. In there we have a group called company name. The caption is set to company name with an instructional text of provide the name of your company. I want to just point out that this screenshot is an old screenshot because we no longer use ML and ENU. So you would just have caption equals company name, and then the US English caption would be contained within the translation file. Remember how that works. Then we have a field. So we add the field name to the group company name, and we set the application area to all. Remember the application area, we have to set that, otherwise you will not see this at all. Then step 4 is adding the actions. So we have a back action, we have a next action, and we have a finish action. And so the names are action back, action next, and action finish, like these actions. So we have the action section. Inside there, we have an area, and it's all going in processing. And then we have 1, 2, 3 actions. We call those action back, etc., etc. And for each action, set the in-footer bar property to true. And in combination with the navigation page value for those, this shows the actions as navigation buttons. So normally, an action shows up at the top of your screen, under the process area, but because this page has a type, page type, navigate page, because it's a navigate page type page, these actions are shown as buttons at the bottom of the page. And that's essential for this wizard type. And you see this little screenshot here in the bottom middle of the screen. That's what that looks like, back and next and finish, right? So create these three global variables of type Boolean, action back allowed, action back, action next allowed, and action finish allowed. And so those are set as variables for the enabled property, and the value of those are set in the functions that'll be in the navigation code in the next step. So on each action, set the image property, previous record, next record, approve, and then the next step is to put a set controls function in there where you say action back allowed current step is greater than 1, because if it's 1 you can't go back, right? It's only if the step is 2, if you're on step 2 you're supposed to be able to go back to step 1. Action next allowed only if the current step is smaller than 3, right? Because if I'm on step 3 I can't go to step 4. I only have a step 3, so if the step is 3, then action next is not allowed, and action finish allowed. In our example, we say you can only finish if you're on current step equals 3 on the final step. And then we have a function called take step. Take step takes an integer as a value, and so current step equals current step plus that value, and then we do set controls. And so on open page, we say when the page opens, we set the current step to 1, and then we do set controls. So here we set the controls to current step equals 1. So if current step equals 1, then action back is not allowed, action next is allowed, action finished is not allowed because the current step is 1 and not 3. Then we have add navigation code. So action back, we click on action back, we execute take step function. Remember, that's the take step function. So we set -1. So if current step is 2 and I do take step -1, then that sets current step to 1. It goes to set control, and that sets the visibility to the different groups in the page. And then we also have an action for next and an action for finish. And finally, we set image headers. These two global record variables for media repository, this is essentially hard-coded. This should really go into a snippet. There should really be a snippet for a wizard. And this is one of the examples that is part of our workshop. I don't think we're going to put this into a video. But yeah, the wizard is using these media repository standard record variables. And this is the what you need to put in there. So you have a standard banner, and then you have a finished banner. So it goes in the same area, right? Remember, we have layout, then we have area. We have here step 1 and step 2 and step 3. Above those steps, you create a group for finished banner and a group for standard banner. And this is what you need to put into that code. So it creates 2 new groups above the step 1 group. Source expression to the image field of the media resources variable, set show caption property to false, and note the expression in the visible property. So you program it like this, it should take care of the headers. Create a new function to load the top banner images. This is hard-coded also. So this value assisted setup no text 400px.png. This is all hard-coded, and so you have to get this right to put this in there. So on init load top banners gets this into the screen. And so the next screenshot, this little gear and this little checkbox, those are part of these two, right? So I'll just leave it in the screen for a little bit. So let's take a quick look in the Azure VM at our wizard. So that's the name. It's a page. It's page type navigate page. Source table company information. So we're going to look in the company information and we're going to make sure that the company information has been completed. And so the way that we've defined it for the demo is we have a company name and an email address. And if either one of those is blank, then in the assisted setup, it'll show up as not completed. So the page type is navigate page. We have a layout area with an area content, the standard and finished banner I'll get to in a second. And then we have, the groups. This is step 1, that's step 2, and that's step 3. And we have actions where we have an action back, an action next, and an action finished. And because of the in footer bar equals true and it's a navigate page, that'll show up as buttons in the bottom. On init, we load the top banners. Let's go all the way to the load top banners function. That's this guy. It retrieves the standard and the done from the media repository based on those names. So assisted setup, no text, assisted setup done, no text. Those are hard-coded values, and that gets the values of that's this guy, these this little gear thing and this little checkbox thing. So that's that part. Take step sets the current step to 1 plus or 1 minus based on what is in the action. So if I go into the action of the action back, that does take step -1. Action next is take step 1, and that sets that current step to the next value, either +1 or -1. And based on that, it sets the visibility of those steps to that. So you can actually give this names that mean something, step 1, step 2, step 3. I've had a situation in which I was creating a wizard and they wanted to change the order in which those pages show up. And so initially I had it called step 1, step 2, step 3, and then they had names for them and they changed it again. And so I was like, maybe instead of step 1, step 2, step 3, I just give it meaningful names. And so I don't have to change the order in which the groups are in there. I can just give it values. And so that's the way I managed it for that client. So that's the wizard. And again, if you want to see how to build this thing from scratch, watch the Sassification video. So let's go back to the presentation. And we go into assisted setup. So what is assisted setup? It's a list of setup scenarios. And when you click on one of those things, it uses a wizard with a relevant option. So the assisted setup is basically a way of showing all the wizards or some of the wizards in the system with a status. And so in the status, it'll say completed or not completed. And based on that information, you can go in there and trigger that setup wizard to help you complete the setup task. And so it's a predefined set of setup scenarios. You have one for cash flow, for approvals, for email, et cetera, and you can add your own for your own setup. So to use the assisted setup, they're available from certain role centers. So on the business manager role center, there is, and you can't really see it from, there's like setup and extensions in the back. And when you click on that, the assisted setup will show up. And then you click on that and then you get this list. And so you see here, migrate business data is not completed. Setup sales tax is completed. And so in our example, we had company information, and the way that we've set up the demo for the assisted setup is if either the name or the email is blank, it'll show up as not completed in assisted setup. In order to add a new assisted setup, the tables that are involved is the assisted setup table and the aggregated assisted setup table. There's an event in those tables on register assisted setup with a parameter temp aggregated assisted setup. and there's a function in there that adds it to it. And so it uses the discovery design pattern to add the assisted setup to the list. And so when you open the assisted setup, there's a trigger in there, and that triggers the logic that adds that assisted setup to that list. And then based on the logic that you give it, it'll put the status in the right value. So let's go into the assisted setup demo. So as you can see, it's a code unit, and the code unit is subscribing to the aggregated assisted setup table, and there's an on register assisted setup event that you can subscribe to. And so we've called it aggregated assisted setup dot on register assisted setup, and it takes a temp aggregated assisted setup record as a parameter, and in there you add the extension assisted setup. And so the company info wizard is the page that we want to do, and there's a number of parameters in that function. And then we have an added function over here that looks at, the values of the status. So this parameter over here is the status of the assisted setup record that you set based on the criteria that you program in here. So as you can see, if company information name is blank or the email is blank, then set the status to not completed, otherwise set it to completed. And if company information does not exist yet, it's also not completed yet. And so by way of the assisted setup that is available on that list, you can then click it, and that click will then initiate that company info wizard, and you can run through it. And so when that wizard has completed, it'll save the company information, right? So this page is based on the company information table. And so when you enter a name and an email, that saves it back to the database, and that triggers that on that event of saving that, and that'll update the assisted setup record with a right status as well. So let's go back to the presentation. Notifications is a way to provide a message to the user that is not intrusive. And by not intrusive, that means that normally when you do message, that shows up a little box, and you can only click on OK to make the box go away. So sometimes you get a message, you're in the middle of something else, you don't want to see the message. That's intrusive because you have to click the message before it can continue. These notifications are in the screen, but you can continue your work, so it's not intrusive. You get the message in the screen. If you want to, you can click on the action, and but you can also just ignore it if you want. The notification is contextual, so you can program it to appear anywhere that you want. There's also a way to get rid of a notification. So let's say if a notification is because you have not yet set a certain value on the screen that you're working on, a notification pops in, then you set a value for that field. The system recognizes that there's now a value for that field, and then you can recall the notification and it goes away. You can add up to 4 optional actions to a notification, and you can program those actions to work in a different way. And so you can set data, you can read data, you can add an action, and then it links to an action in the system that triggers some business logic. And it works with any client. So whether you're on the Windows client or the web client or the tablet client, of course with Business Central you don't have the Windows client, but it works with phone, tablet, web, it doesn't matter. To create a notification, you have 2 new types in AL. One is notification and one is notification scope. You have full control over the context. You can include data and actions, and you can recall notification, as I've said before. And the user can personalize if you can have the notifications to the My Notifications page. So a code example of one of these notifications is on page 42, that's the sales order page. On open page event, I've subscribed, and the check company info on open sales order procedure then looks at the company information, and if the name is blank and the email is blank, then you get a notification. And the notification itself will then add an action that if you click on that, you run the code unit notification wizard. So, that procedure, show company info wizard, runs that wizard, and then based on that, you can start that. And that, by the way, also interacts with that assisted setup. So assisted setup reacts to the values in company information. Remember, so if you then open the assisted setup screen after you've run it from the notification, it'll know, it's completely interactive with that system. Some tips for notification: always use a unique ID. It can be any GUID. You can use GUIDgen.com to generate those things. Add actions points to a function in a code unit. So that is smart enough to know whether you've entered the right value or not. And use set data and get data to exchange information between the sending and the handling function. So let's take a look at one of those notifications. Here's the company info notification code unit. And as you can see, I have a function called show company wizard or show company info wizard. And as you can see here in the add action, the code unit 50106, that's this guy, company info notification, show company info wizard. So this notification is linked to this code unit. And so we are subscribed to the on open page event of the sales order page. And when that opens, it'll look into company information. And if the name and the email are not blank, then we get a notification. And so it'll say company information is missing. And then when you click on this notification, it runs the company info wizard that we created. So that's really a quick and easy way. And again, if you want to see the details, if you want to build this thing from scratch by yourself, then watch the Sassification video. I will take you through the entire process from scratch, and that should be a fun exercise. So let's go back to the presentation. If you want to learn more about this topic and others, please visit the website on your screen, aka.ms/businesscentralapps. All that's left for me is to say thank you so much for your time and watching this video. I hope you've learned a thing or two. Please have a wonderful rest of your day.